The village of Kalapati sits in a valley so narrow that the sun only touches its floor for 4 hours a day, and in the exact center of that valley, in the exact center of the village, there's a well. It is built from gray stone that nobody in the village claims to have quarried, ringed by a lip of rock worn smooth not by water, but by hands that have spent 300 years reaching toward it and then pulling back. The houses of Kalapati are arranged in a perfect circle around this well, 42 of them, and every single door faces outward, away from the center, toward the forest. Every window is cut on the outer wall. Nobody built it this way by accident. The founding families of Kalapati drew up their homes in the year 1721 according to the temple ledger, and the ledger contains a single instruction repeated 42 times, once for each house. Face away from the stones. Ritu Devi Solanki inherited the last house on the eastern arc of the circle from her grandmother, and with the house, she inherited the family's specific method of crossing the village square. You do not walk through the center. You walk the outer ring, keeping the well in the very corner of your eye, letting it blur into a gray smudge that your mind can process as there, without ever processing it as seen. The children of Kalapati are taught this walk before they are taught to read. It looks, to an outsider, like a strange communal dance. Dozens of people crossing the same open space every day, all of them curving slightly, all of them tilting their heads at the same subtle angle, none of them ever cutting a straight line through the middle. A photographer who visited in 1988 called it the choreography in his notebook, and the name has followed the village since, though the residents never uttered it themselves. They have no name for it. To name a behavior is to admit it exists, and the first rule of living in Kalapati, older than the ledger, older than the houses, is that some things are survived by never being spoken about directly. The well itself is unremarkable to look at, if you could bring yourself to look at it. 4 feet across, walled to hip height, no bucket, no rope, no cover. Groundwater surveys conducted by the State Agricultural Department in 1974 measured its depth at just past 30 meters before their equipment failed to register anything further, and the surveyor, a man named Prakash Iyer, wrote in his report that the echo returned by his sounding line arrived roughly 0.4 of a second too early for a shaft of that depth, as if something inside had shortened the distance between the surface and itself. He also wrote, in a section of the report that was later removed from the district archive, but survives in his personal papers, that during the final measurement, before he lifted the line for the last time, he heard his own name spoken from the shaft in his own voice, clearly, calmly, a full 2 seconds before he opened his mouth to call it out to his assistant standing at the rim. The residents of Kalapati do not need a state report to know this. They know it the way you know your own pulse, felt rather than examined. The well answers before you speak. Not every day, and not to everyone, but often enough, and specifically enough, that no family in the village has escaped it for more than 2 or 3 generations. Ritu's grandmother, Kushalya, told her once, in the flat, unemotional voice the old women of Kalapati use for the worst stories, about her own mother's death in 1962. Her mother had gone to fetch water from a hand pump near the well before dawn, a task everyone else refused, because Kushalya's mother had a hip injury and could not manage the longer outer route in the dark. She had crossed close to the center that morning. Kushalya, 7 years old, had been watching from the doorway, and she said that a full 3 seconds before her mother cried out in pain from stumbling on a loose stone, the well had already made the sound, the exact pitch and shape of a scream that had not happened yet. Her mother heard it too. She stopped walking. She looked down into the black circle of the shaft, which nobody is supposed to do, and whatever she saw in those 2 or 3 seconds before the actual fall, before the actual scream, was enough that she never spoke another full sentence for the rest of her life. She lived 19 more years in the house at the end of the northern arc, tending a small garden, humming instead of talking, and she never once let her eyes drift toward the center of the village again. This is the arithmetic every family in Kalapati learns without ever writing it down. The well tells you what is about to happen to you, in your own voice, moments before it happens, but only if you look. If you do not look, if you keep the well in the soft blur of peripheral vision, the sound stays sealed inside the stone, muffled, present but not directed at you specifically. The residents have come to believe, though nobody can say where this belief originated, that the well does not create the misfortune it announces. It only reports it early. Hearing your own death, your own grief, your own worst moment, spoken back to you by something that already knows the shape of your future, does something to a person that the misfortune itself, arriving in its own natural time, does not do. Kausalya used to say that the well was not cruel. It was accurate. And accuracy, delivered without warning, without mercy, and slightly ahead of schedule, is its own kind of violence. The village enforces its silence with a discipline that outsiders mistake for superstition and locals understand as Triya. At noon, when the sun sits directly overhead and the well's shadow shrinks to almost nothing, the entire square empties. Shops shutter. Even the stray dogs, which the older residents insist can sense the shift before any human does, retreat to the tree line. This is the hour when the shaft's echo carries furthest and clearest, according to 3 centuries of informal observation, the hour when even a whispered thought crossing your mind near the rim might be enough to summon your own voice back at you from the dark, delivering something you are not ready to hear. Nobody has tested this theory recently because nobody needs to. The one time in living memory it was tested was in 2003, when a college student named Devrathor, home for the summer and contemptuous of what he called his grandparents, cult, walked to the center of the square at noon on a dare from his cousins and leaned over the rim to shout down into it, just to prove nothing would happen. 3 residents who were near enough to their windows to see, though not near enough to hear clearly, later gave nearly identical accounts to the village elder, and their accounts were recorded in the same ledger that holds the 1721 building instructions, because Kalapati keeps records of everything that happens near the well, in the same flat, procedural language used for land disputes and harvest counts. Dev leaned over the rim. His mouth was still open, the shout not yet released, when something answered from the depth in his own voice, and what it said was not his name, and not a scream, but a full sentence, spoken calmly, the way you'd read out a delivery date. The 3 witnesses could not agree on the exact wording, but all 3 agreed on one detail. The sentence ended with a specific date, 11 days from that afternoon. Dev did not tell anyone what he heard. He stopped going near the square for the rest of the summer, then stopped speaking about the well entirely, then, on the 11th day, was found at the bottom of the family's dry storage cistern on the far edge of the property, a full kilometer from the central well, a location he had no ordinary reason to be near. The official record calls it an accident, a misstep in poor light. The village elder's private notation, added afterward in smaller handwriting at the bottom of the entry, reads only, he heard the date, and the date came looking for him. Rita still walks the outer ring every morning to reach the eastern well, which is the village's actual water supply, dug decades after the central well was sealed off from use, positioned at the far edge of the settlement precisely so that no family would ever again need a reason to cross close to the middle. She has raised her own children on the same choreography her grandmother taught her, the same practiced blur, the same refusal to let her eyes settle. She has never looked down into the central stones, not once in 40 years of living beside them, and she plans to die without ever doing so, because she has come to understand something about the well that she cannot fully explain to outsiders who ask why the village simply doesn't fill it in with rubble and be done with it. Filling it would require someone to stand at the rim for the hours it would take, sacks of stone in hand, looking down long enough to aim. Nobody in 300 years has been willing to buy that much time at the edge of something that already knows exactly what you're about to say, and is only waiting, patiently, for you to look, so it can say it first.